I ignored a feeling once, for almost 8 months. I could name its shape. Not a thought, not something that organized itself into words. Just something in my chest that didn't move, no matter what I said on top of it. I put reasons on top of it. Good ones. I put gratitude on top of it. And perspective. And the rational accounting of everything I had to lose by listening. I put exhaustion on top of it. I was finishing my last year in hospice, which gave me a useful story. Of course I felt that way. The work was enormous. The weight was real. The feeling was probably just an extension of that. It sat there through all of it. Through every argument I made against it. Through every night I fell asleep having convinced myself it was nothing. Here's what I eventually had to accept. I was not confused. I had known for 8 months. I'd just been doing something that Jung described with uncomfortable precision. I'd been choosing the conclusion I preferred and then working backward to justify it, treating the body's testimony like noise rather than signal, waiting for the feeling to be wrong. It wasn't. Jung spent decades arguing that the unconscious doesn't speak in full sentences. It doesn't reason with you or present its case in a format your analytical mind can evaluate. It transmits differently. In images, in physical sensation, in what he called the mere perception of relations and conditions that the conscious functions cannot access on their own. Intuition, in his framework, was the name for this specific channel. Not mystical, not supernatural. The function that perceives via the unconscious, before logic has assembled itself, before the evidence has been cataloged. He defined it carefully in Psychological Types, published in 1921, a book he spent years on and considered one of his most important. His framing: intuition is the function that transmits perceptions of relations and conditions, which could be gained by the other functions either not at all or only by very roundabout ways. It is faster. It operates in advance. And unlike the other 3 functions, thinking, feeling, sensation, it does its work before you are aware of it, which is what makes ignoring it so easy and so expensive. There are a lot of feelings that claim urgency. Anxiety is loud and constant and very good at convincing you it matters. Old fear tends to masquerade as present intuition. The nervous system runs patterns that were relevant 20 years ago and presents them as current intelligence. So when I say intuition, I'm not talking about every uncomfortable feeling, every hesitation, every low-grade unease. I'm talking about something more specific than that. And Jung was specific about what distinguishes genuine intuitive perception from the background weather of a sensitive person's inner life. There are 2 markers. Both of them are distinctive enough to recognize once you know what you are looking for. The first is the body signal that doesn't resolve when the argument does. Here's what this looks like in practice. You have a concern. Specific, not diffuse. About a person, a situation, a decision you're moving toward. You think it through. You reason it to a conclusion. The case is made. The argument is finished. And then you notice the thing in your chest is still there. Not smaller, not quieter, still exactly as present as before you started thinking. This is different from anxiety, which tends to cycle through the same content and amplify in proportion to the attention you give it. Anxiety wants to argue. It engages with each point you make and finds a new angle to come back around. It responds to evidence, even if only to question that evidence. What I am describing doesn't respond to evidence. It doesn't move when you win the argument. You close the case and it's still sitting on the table, patient, waiting for you to stop. Antonio Damasio spent 20 years studying exactly this. His somatic marker hypothesis, developed through his research with patients who had sustained damage to the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, arrived at something Jung had been observing clinically for decades before the neuroscience existed to name it. Damasio found that patients who lost the neurological capacity to receive bodily signals also lost the ability to make sound decisions, not because their logical reasoning was impaired. It wasn't, but because they had lost access to what the body was encoding. The body had been holding compressed experiential data about past outcomes. Without those somatic signals, even intact cognition couldn't navigate well. His formulation? The body votes first, then the brain interprets the vote. What Jung called intuition. The unconscious perception that arrives before reasoning can catch up. Damasio would recognize as the somatic system doing its job. When the body stays open after the mind has closed, that's not irrationality. That's a different data system, often faster, often more accurate, doing something the analytical function can't do alone, holding the whole pattern at once, including the parts you haven't consciously registered yet. Pay attention to the signal that doesn't discharge when the argument ends. That stubbornness is informational. The body is not being irrational. It knows something you haven't finished understanding yet. But here's what Jung was precise about. There is a second marker, and this one is harder to dismiss because of when it appears. The unconscious communicates most clearly when the defenses are down. Jung documented this in his own work extensively and personally. His Red Book, the illustrated record of his confrontation with the unconscious that he worked on for over 16 years beginning in 1914, is full of material that began arriving at threshold moments. The minutes before sleep, the first seconds of waking, the silence in the middle of an ordinary afternoon that suddenly opened into something else entirely. He came to treat these moments not as symptoms of instability, as many of his contemporaries would have, but as specific windows, times when the unconscious could speak before the conscious editorial apparatus came fully back online. Recent research on hypnagogic states, the physiological border between waking and sleep, has found something interesting, that this transition zone is associated with unusual perceptual content, loosened cognitive control, and a kind of intuitive accessibility the waking mind doesn't have. The mind at that threshold processes differently. Jung didn't have the brain imaging studies. He had 30 years of clinical observation, his own detailed notebooks, and the patience to sit with material that made no immediate sense. The second marker is the thought that returns specifically at these thresholds, not in the middle of active worry. Anxiety does that, and it's not threshold specific. What I'm describing is this. You haven't been thinking about it. You're about to fall asleep, or you've just woken up and the day hasn't organized itself yet, or you're in the pause between two moments of an ordinary conversation. And a specific concern surfaces. Not as a thought you're generating. More like something that was already there and briefly became visible. It doesn't escalate. It doesn't spin into catastrophizing or pull you into an argument. It arrives, stays quietly for a moment, and recedes. And it keeps coming back to the same place, the same specific concern, again and again. That repetition is not anxiety circling. Anxiety escalates. It finds new angles, new worst-case scenarios, new evidence. This stays level. Same pitch. Same content. Same specific point it keeps returning you to. Jung's explanation. The unconscious is patient in a way the conscious mind isn't. It will transmit the same signal as many times as necessary. It surfaces at thresholds because that's when it can get through, before the daily machinery covers it over. And the urgency is in the persistence and the location, not in volume or drama. I had this exact experience during those 8 months I mentioned. Every morning, in the first 10 or 15 seconds before my brain organized the day, the same specific thought would surface. Not a story, not a catastrophe, just a single clear recognition, the same one every morning for months. I got very good at letting the day crowd in fast and cover it over. That worked well enough during daylight hours, but it was there every morning, returning to the same place, waiting. Jung wrote something in his later work that I've thought about many times since. He said that whatever the conscious mind refuses to deal with, the unconscious will eventually present in a form that cannot be ignored. He meant something technical by that energy bound in unresolved material builds pressure until it finds expression, through symptoms, through relationships, through crisis. But I've always heard it as something simpler, too. The unconscious is genuinely trying to help you. It's not perverse. It's not punishing you for the months you ignored it. It keeps bringing you back to the same point because that point matters and you haven't dealt with it yet. The question I get asked most often about this is, how do I know if what I'm feeling is intuition or just fear? And the honest answer is, you can't always know immediately. But there are differences worth watching. Fear wants resolution. It urgently needs you to do something. Plan, prepare, escape, argue, protect. It generates activity and pressure in the direction of action. It responds to reassurance, at least temporarily. What I'm describing doesn't want anything from you except your attention. It doesn't escalate if you sit quietly with it rather than trying to resolve it. It doesn't need you to fix anything immediately. It simply stays present, returns to the same place, and waits. That waiting quality. That's the thing. I eventually did what I'd been avoiding for 8 months, and I want to be honest about what that actually looked like. It wasn't a dramatic moment. It wasn't a single decision made in an hour. It was more like a slow acknowledgement. The feeling was right. It had been right for months. And the most honest thing I could do was stop arguing against it. What shifted first wasn't my external circumstances. What shifted was that I stopped spending energy on the maintenance of a conclusion I didn't actually believe. Jung's phrase for what he was asking of people, what he was asking of himself when he began the Red Book, was attending to the inner life, not acting on every signal immediately, not dramatizing everything the unconscious hands you, just not looking away, not letting the day crowd in before you've had those first quiet seconds, letting the morning be what it is before it becomes what you need it to be. If there is something in you that stays after the argument's end, that keeps returning to the same specific place, not louder, not escalating, just present, it is probably worth sitting still with it for longer than you usually allow yourself. That's not mysticism. That's just honest listening. And the thing trying to reach you has probably already been quite specific about what it needs you to know.